Hi everyone, welcome. I am Tori, and I decided recently that I wanted to record and sort of share my experiences with becoming a foster parent, and just also using this as an opportunity to get some things off my chest in a therapeutic way, and also just share some funny things that have happened and a lot of things that I've learned. So I've decided that, of course, to keep things neutral and to ensure that privacy is held, that I will be using aliases and not really giving specific details about myself in terms of anything that could link this to me specifically, to protect myself and also to protect my foster daughter. So in a sense, I'm giving you less so that I can end up really sharing more and delving into things and trying to be as open and honest as possible for myself, to hopefully just process things. I would like to start by saying that becoming a foster parent was a really long decision-making process in a sense. It took me, I would say, probably a good 3 or 4 years to finally make that commitment to becoming a foster parent. And it was a lot of discussions with myself and my husband, and it was a lot of things that led up to our decision to become foster parents. I wouldn't take this decision lightly. I wouldn't encourage anyone to become a foster parent. Of course, there are kids out there who need homes, and there are kids out there who would benefit from having a good home and somebody to care for them and love them, but it doesn't come without its challenges. So if you're considering it, I encourage you to really take your time making the decision and to really do your research. Do your research in terms of what kind of things you need to provide. Do your research in terms of how you as a person function, and just trying to understand the kind of kids that you're going to be interacting with. So the kids who are in foster care, most of them have experienced really severe trauma, and they've had a lot of difficulties throughout their life, and they don't really know how to navigate any of those experiences. So they come to you with a wealth of experiences that are by far more than most people have ever had to deal with. They've had a lot of challenges, a lot of hurt, a lot of pain. Again, more than most people ever have to deal with in their lifetime. And they're only 5, 8, 7, 10. They're kids. And so it's difficult because we have our own understanding of the way kids should behave, and each person, I think, we come into the situation of foster care understanding as much as we can. Like, that they have these problems, but at the end of the day, as much as you want to be understanding and empathetic, you come from what you've grown up with, what you've learned, and what you understand about the way kids should behave. So whether that's what your parents taught you, or what you experienced with your own family, or even possibly if you already have children, it could be how you interpret the behavior of your own children and those expectations that you put forward for them. And so I think what that leads to is two things. You have to grapple with, number one, your own previous expectations and biases, that you may think that you're like, oh yeah, no, I got this, I can do this, it doesn't matter. But the reality is in the situation when the child is misbehaving or the child is acting out, you yourself go into defense mode. You yourself go into the punishment or authoritarian, and it's hard. It's hard to back out of that because that's our natural instinct and our natural kind of state of mind, we easily move into, this shouldn't be happening. How can I stop it? What can I do to change the course of this behavior or interaction right now? And how do I make it not happen again? And I think that's where the punishment comes into play. We think, okay, we have to instill some kind of consequence to ensure that this doesn't happen again. But that's just not the way it works. A lot of times the kids are triggered by so many things that you may not even think could be a trigger, because they've experienced so much trauma and so many things that you have no information about. It's really hard for you to understand where they're coming from or what triggered them or how to proceed. And the reality is even as much as you would like for the behavior to not continue, it is going to continue over and over and over again. A punishment or a consequence within, 5 minutes or within seconds of a behavior, you might think, oh, if I'm handling it right away, right now, then it just won't continue happening. That's just not the reality. The reality is until the trauma is treated, until they deal with whatever's holding them back emotionally, mentally, that's just not going to occur. And I want to say right now that I'm not an expert on anything. The one thing I know in life is that I don't know anything. And so I'm just coming from a place of my own research, my own understanding, and my own personal and professional experiences, like in terms of what I've studied and just classes I've taken throughout my life and, my career. I am in education, so I have like some, different perspectives on just kids in general because of my education and my exposure. But I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a sociologist, social worker, none of those things. So I come from a place of someone who is educated and someone who has really good intentions, but also someone who is not necessarily equipped to do this whole foster care thing. And I don't have kids. My husband and I, we don't have children. So this is our first experience with taking care of a child. And I would say that for the most part, it's been exactly what I had expected. I expected it to be hard beyond belief. I expected there to be challenges and frustrations and things that were just beyond my control. But I did not anticipate how I would handle the feelings of frustration, isolation, failure. If you go, the most of your life, if you spend most of your life one way, whether that be single, whether that be married, whether that be childless, you develop your own routine and way of living. And even if you have children, you develop your own routine and way of living. And so when the foster child enters your home, you are essentially disrupted. I don't know if that's the correct word to use, but even though you've agreed to it and you know what's going to happen and you know they're coming and you've invited them, all of those things are, true. It doesn't change the fact that once that person is in your home, things change. And if you've ever had a roommate, if you've ever dated a boyfriend and you guys moved in together, there is a huge period of time in which you are adjusting. You're adjusting to each other's behaviors, habits, tendencies, expectations. But imagine that your roommate that you're moving in with is not an adult. So they're not at an age where they can process and think and respect boundaries, right? And then also on top of that, imagine that that person has experienced some really traumatic things in their life. And so they're also dealing with mental health and a lot of issues that they have on their own. So now things are different. It's not just someone coming to live with you. There's all these other factors that come into play. And it really affects how you kind of navigate on a day-to-day basis. The other thing is, if you have children already, you've taught them and instilled patterns of behavior and habits from since birth. So you've built a routine, a structure, and boundaries, and those things have been, tested, of course, because kids test you. But for the most part, they've been adhered to because that's the only world and the only way to live that they've experienced, so that's all they understand. And so what happens is when you have a foster child come to live with you, it could be a child who's had multiple placements, it could be a child who's lived, it could be the first time that they're taken from their home. It doesn't really matter. But what matters is that prior expectations existed. And a lot of times, the things that we cling to the most are things that we know. The things that we know are safe and comfortable, and we know them. I know that, for example, if I'm a child, I know that, at my previous home, whether it was with my parents or another placement, this is when meals were. This is when bedtime was. If I got in trouble, this was how the consequence or the punishment went. If I did good things, this is how the consequence or the punishment went. And to come into a new environment and to have those new expectations placed upon the child, it can be a lot. It can be a lot of adjustment for them, especially if now consequences are handled differently, if now praise and encouragement is handled differently. And it could be both obviously negative and positive things, but the reality is it's all different. And so just like when you go to a new job and you're trying to acclimate, I would definitely argue that there is a good period of time at a new job where you're just so uncomfortable because you're like, I don't know these people. I don't know this workspace. I don't feel fully connected to what I'm doing or where I'm at. And those things exist in such simple places like a job. And so, imagine that, that's your home life. And the children that get moved, the other reality is they've lost so many familiarities, their school, their friends, their family. There's so many things that have changed for them so quickly. So, and now they're trying to adhere to your expectations. And it can be tough. It can be tough for you as a parent, as a foster parent, to be fully empathetic and understanding. Because while you might think that you are, the reality is you have a very difficult time separating your expectations from that child. Because I think as people, we live by our expectations. And it's true. You have an expectation for your boss. If you get a boss or start working for a company and that boss doesn't meet your expectations of competency or compassion or whatever it might be, you find yourself really miserable. Even though that person, may not need to meet your expectations, you have expectations. Same goes for your partner and your relationships and your family. There are things that you expect, and when those people don't meet those expectations, we become disappointed, we have arguments, all of those things. So as much as we like to be understanding as human beings and try to be empathetic, I think at the forefront of all of our decision making is our values and our expectations. And so it's hard to separate that. So while a behavior that a child is exhibiting might be, something that's triggered from past trauma, in that moment, a lot of times I think we're just focused on, I don't want you to act like this. This is not how you're supposed to act. You need to stop it. And it becomes really exhausting and frustrating. So I guess all of this is to say that if you do decide to become a foster parent, you should really proceed with caution. You should proceed with caution in the sense that you should do a lot to self-reflect. You should do a lot to take the time to research and understand. And most importantly, I think you need to create your own kind of pattern of or ways to decompress after a unwanted behavior occurs. So the reality is you're not going to get a kid who's perfect. Nobody's perfect, and especially these children are not perfect. And so it's important for you to, number one, understand that there are going to be moments where things blow up and fall apart. And then after those things blow up and fall apart, I think it's important to begin to create a safe space for you to decompress and a safe space for you to really think about and process how you're feeling. Because I think what happens a lot of times, and this could just be me, and this could totally, be irrelevant for anybody else, but a lot of times the internal conversation and the dialogue that takes place is, I don't want to do this. What did I get myself into? I'm not qualified. I'm not the person to take care of this child. This is exhausting. This is not my fault. Why should I have to take care of this child if this is how I'm going to be treated? We very much internalize it and make it about ourselves. Like, how could this child treat me this way when I'm doing X, Y, and Z for them? When the reality is all they know is that they've lost everything that was valuable and important to them, and that now they have to be placed with some stranger, and this stranger has a whole new set of rules and expectations, and if they don't meet that expectation, even though they're trying their hardest to process everything and do everything, they're not good enough because they're not meeting expectations. So perhaps they were not good enough before for their parents, their previous placement, and now here they are again feeling the same lack of self-esteem and, still lacking that self-worth. And so you are both experiencing some really tough emotions and feelings. So I think it's just important to take time to kind of process how you're feeling and do something that just brings you joy, reinvigorates you. And I think also it's super important for you to be honest with yourself. I think it's important for you to, if you don't feel yourself progressing, if you don't feel yourself improving as you're going through the process and as you're attempting to grow and reflect, then maybe fostering really isn't for you. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. Obviously, we need good people to do this hard work in the world. And obviously, there are lots of people out there who cannot have children for whatever reason. Maybe they just physically can't. Maybe they don't want to. And so, but yet they decided that they want to engage with children and take care of them and provide a loving, wonderful home for them. And there's tons of reasons to do the foster care, to go that route, to be that person for that child. But I think it's important to recognize that it's going to be hard and it may not be, you may think that you know what it's going to be, but once you're in it, it's definitely a lot different. So, I don't know, I guess I decided to kind of label this first episode as, should you be a foster parent? The answer is probably, I would say most of the time the answer is probably no. And that sounds terrible, and it sounds like I'm not promoting this, but I would encourage people not to take this lightly. I would encourage them to think about what it is that they're looking for or they feel like they're missing in their life to want to do this. I know for me personally, I thought like, oh, I really need to have kids in my life. I really need to have that experience of being a parent. And I'm going to be honest, completely honest, because there's no reason for me not to. I told my husband, I thought that I was going to feel fulfilled. I thought that there was this gaping hole where I needed that experience, but the reality is I don't feel fulfilled. I don't feel like the missing piece is there. I actually feel quite the opposite. Doing this experience and having this time to really start to learn what it's like to be a foster parent, I think the one thing I've learned is that life is such a gift, and the lives that we create and we build for ourselves, whether it's alone, single, whether it's with a partner, or whether it is with a family. Whatever the decision is that you make to create your life and your space and your home and all of those things, and your career and your way of living and your morals and your value, all of those things are special and unique and beautiful, and they're so individual to each of us. And I think it's very rare that we're missing anything. I think we have been taught to feel like there's a certain way that we should live, and that there's a certain way that we should be, and there are certain things that we should have had done by X time or Y time or whatever. Like, there's these little marks that we're ticking off. And if we don't have those things, then we're missing out. And so very much children, I think, is at the forefront of one of those expectations of our society. You know, if you don't have children, or you don't want to have children, like, what's wrong with you? And I think that's just such an interesting thing for me personally to experience, because I definitely felt like, wow, I don't have children, so there's something wrong with me, and there's something wrong with my life, and I'm not going to feel happy unless that happens. And I don't feel that way. Taking care of my foster daughter, it's work, and I don't hate it or anything. I don't want to make it sound like this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. But, I mean, when she's throwing a fit, yeah, it feels like this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. I'm like, dear God, why did I do this to myself? But I think it's important to let myself feel that way and think that way so that I can kind of get it out. But all of this was to say that whatever life that you have, I don't think that it's going to be improved by taking care of a traumatized child. So if you decide to do foster care, you know, I really take the time to think about it, really take the time to search for internally, what is it that you're missing? What is it that you think that will be fulfilled? What expectation from society, people, your family, your friends, what is it that they're putting out there that's making you feel like this is the right option? And you could be totally different. You could be totally approaching this from the perspective of, oh, I want to do this because I want to help out a child, or, oh, I want to do this because I was part of the system before, or I experienced trauma in my life and I want to extend a helping hand. And maybe your reasoning is different, but I will say, no matter what your reason is, I think the experience is the same. As much as I would like to say that, oh, the people who go into this, oh, with the right heart and the right this and the right that, they're going to experience it differently, that doesn't ring true to me. Just like every kid who's in the system has experienced trauma, and they all have to deal with that trauma, whatever avenue of therapy that they take, you don't get to ignore the trauma and never address it. And I think that's the same for us as human beings. Like, going into this, the reality is, just as people, we have expectations, we have things that we want and need for people to do in order for us to think that they're behaving well. And so, regardless of our understanding and of our empathy, there's going to be times of frustration, anger, and just, you might feel like you have to disengage, or like you can't handle it. So, I encourage you, if you are thinking about doing foster care, to take your time. And I encourage you to reach out to other people who are doing it. Maybe find a support group or a forum where people are posting, because the people who are doing this, I think they're the best examples of the reality of it. You know, don't talk to people who have kids. You know, other people who have their own biological children, it's different. I have friends who have kids, and their advice and their guidance is all so kind and so well respected, and I appreciate it. And I appreciate that they understand the day-to-day parent struggles, but they don't understand the child. They don't understand the child's needs, and the advice that they give comes from a place of someone who has a child that has been with them since birth and is meeting the expectations that they've created for them and the life that they've created for them. So there's so many factors that, just typical parents really don't understand and can't take an account for. So I hope this was somewhat helpful or thought-provoking, or just kind of gave you some perspective. I know for me, talking it out right now, even though I'm in a room by myself, just kind of sharing my thoughts and feelings, it feels good, and it's nice because everything I was saying was honestly a good reminder for me. I, struggle so much with just my own personal expectations of everything. And it's good for me to remind myself of what it is that the child is dealing with, and that I need to keep that at the forefront of, my decision making in terms of when I deal with misbehavior. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I will definitely continue posting, and hopefully other posts will be way more lighthearted, because I know this one was kind of deep and heavy, but I just kind of wanted to get my initial thoughts and feelings about it in general out there before I could delve into all the other funny things that have happened, and the funny things that I've learned, and the more reflective things that I've been able to kind of encounter on this journey. So thank you guys, and I'll see you on the next one.